Good evening. I'm Teresa Skubik, and this is Forum Daily for Wednesday, February 12th. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has named Kevin Brosseau as fentanyl czar to fight the spread of deadly fentanyl. The Prime Minister's office says Brosseau's demonstrated expertise tackling drug trafficking, organized crime networks, and other national security threats will bring great value to the position. Member of Parliament for Spadina-Fort York, Kevin Vuong, joined us earlier for his reaction to the announcement.
The first consideration, especially if the Trump administration doesn't believe that the Canadian government has taken the issue of fentanyl seriously, appointing somebody who up until December was the Deputy National Security Intelligence Advisor to this government does not help to address that concern, because this is a person that was part of this administration in turning a blind eye to this issue. That first and foremost is bad for Canadians. Fentanyl being produced in our country is bad for Canada. Its use and spread throughout our country to further addictions, but also add to the toxicity of the opioid crisis is bad for Canadians. It shouldn't have taken a foreign government to force our government to do what's best for Canadians. So not only is this going to, I think, not make things any better with regards to the Trump administration, I think this is simply window dressing for a domestic audience. And that's the thing that I'm probably most worried about, is that we have a government and a party that is looking to poke the bear because it actually helps to reverse how they're doing in the polls. There is, I think rightfully so, a rally around the flag. We're living in unprecedented times right now where our closest ally and friend, their current government, is making attacks on Canada in a way that we've never dealt with. I haven't in my lifetime. And so on the one hand, this is an opportunity for us to finally start to address the very things that we need to do to build up our own sovereignty for our own economic prosperity. But I don't think that is the overriding motivation for the Trudeau government and whoever will lead the Liberals after March 9th. I think they see this as an opportunity to shift the enemy, if you will, and also shift their political fortunes as a result.
We also asked Mr. Vuong for his view on why it took complaints from the Trump administration for Ottawa to act on the issue of fentanyl.
People like myself and others in the House of Commons have been raising this. The fact that our border is leaking like a sieve. The fact that there have been whistleblowers from CBSA who have raised concerns about the integrity of that agency and the border more broadly. But the government has always turned a blind eye to it. And it unfortunately needed a foreign government, remove who it is for a moment. And let's just center on the fact that it took a non-Canadian government to get ours to pay attention to an issue that is killing our people. And so it is rich for the Liberal government and their supporters to now turn around and call us treasonous for daring to raise an issue that, for the record, I've been raising for a long time now, but also the fact that somehow we are the ones betraying Canada when our priority has always been the safety of Canadians and our country.
U.S. President Donald Trump's administration has confirmed that the 25% tariffs on aluminum and steel imports would be stacked on top of the already proposed 25% tariffs on all Canadian goods. This means Canadian aluminum and steel would have 50% tariffs placed on them. Canadian premiers were in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday to speak with U.S. lawmakers to warn them of the impacts of the tariffs. While in D.C., Quebec's premier explained just how reliant the U.S. market is when it comes to aluminum, explaining that Mr. Trump's tariffs are going to put the U.S. in a bad position.
you may decide not to ship as much to United States. Somebody will ship, but there's a balance. There's no overcapacity, maybe except for a part of China. But China, they don't deliver. They don't export. How do you say that? Primaire aluminum. No, non-transform, all right? They don't do that anymore. So there's not much risk for the aluminum business in Quebec because there's no overcapacity. So if United States decide to buy aluminum from Asia or from Europe, then we'll sell to Europe and Asia. So there's a balance. So it's not much risk. I think the risk is for Mr. Trump because in the United States, they use every year 5 million tons of aluminum and they only produce 700,000 or 800,000, which is 14% of their needs. We supply Quebec supply 60% of their needs. So they are in a bad position, for sure. So that's why I say it doesn't make sense for him. Nobody believes that he can produce more aluminum. And I was with the big companies today. Nobody believes that he can make more aluminum in the United States. So he's not in the good position for aluminum. So I guess in talking about aluminum yesterday or today, he's trying to accomplish something else. He would like to have more manufacturing jobs in the United States, but for sure it won't be in the aluminum business.
The premier also spoke about what the province will do to help aluminum manufacturers in response to the tariffs.
Can we talk about the medium and smaller businesses around the aluminum industry? How will you offer financial compensation to help them out? Is that something you're considering, your government?
Yeah. The primary business, no impact. The transformation of aluminum will do two things. First, give them some cash flow, go through the months if there's tariffs. And second, offer them help for diversification. So Investissement Québec will be very aggressive, first to make sure that they stay alive, and second, to offer them diversification.
Quebec's Premier François Legault, when speaking to the press, also cautioned against retaliatory tariffs ahead of the approaching deadline set by the Trump administration.
Legault, if you wouldn't mind in English, can you talk about whether or not it's time for retaliation, whether or not there's consensus amongst the premiers as to when we fight back with retaliatory tariffs? Or here on a diplomatic mission, It doesn't appear to be working.
Okay. First, I think retaliation must be done only if and only if there are tariffs that are really charged. So far, it's not done. It won't be done before March 4th or March the 12th. So we must not put any retaliation measures before, but we have to prepare ourselves. We already announced a list of counter tariff. I think we should consider also putting exportation tariff on products like aluminum, where they really need us. But I think the first choice is to have no tariff, to have a general agreement as soon as possible.
And Alberta Premier Danielle Smith used her time at the mic to stress that she feels diplomacy is working.
I think diplomacy is working. I think that the fact that we got a 30-day reprieve was because we agreed to work on the cross-border problem of fentanyl. I was pleased to see the federal government announce a fentanyl czar, and my administration has already been in touch with him to talk about how in Alberta we can lend to the success of those efforts. So what I would say is what I've seen from this president is that he is prepared to make a deal. We've made a deal on that. I think we can make a deal on steel and aluminum by making very much the same argument that I've been making on energy and critical minerals. We've won the argument that those raw materials are essential to American success. It comes in, it makes value-added products, It creates good American jobs. It creates good American products that we buy back. Same thing for aluminum. They just do not make enough for their defense industry, their auto industry, and their critical needs. So I think aluminum, we can make the very same argument. And on steel, we buy as much steel products from them as they buy from us.
And Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew commented on the toughness of Canadians while joking about how Americans have a hard time handling the snow.
So I just wanted to say, over the past few weeks, Canadians have seen that we can get results when we stick up for ourselves. And we are tough as Canadians. I mean, you see a little bit of snowfall here. The entire city of Washington, D.C. comes to a halt. But us Canadians, we're going outside without our coats on.
All right, coming up after the break, a new Leger poll suggests that a federal Liberal Party led by Mark Carney would erase the lead that the Conservatives have in the polls. Stay with us. Forum Daily will be right back after these messages. Last night on CNN, Chrystia Freeland outlined her response to Donald Trump's tariffs, highlighting that a federal government led by her would not only match Mr. Trump's tariffs, but would also lay down tariffs on key industries important to the president and his allies.
What does that trade blow look like if you're the next prime minister?
Dollar for dollar retaliation. Any tariff imposed on Canada, Canada will respond to, and our response is going to be smart and targeted. The tariffs the U.S. is threatening Canada with are across the board, and they're going to hurt you. Take aluminum. Aluminum is basically electricity in solid form, and in imposing a 25% tariff on Canadian aluminum, you're hurting yourselves. You're putting a 25% tax on electricity, and you actually need more electricity today in this AI race with China.
Yep.
Our retaliation is going to be a lot more surgical than that. We are going to go after American stakeholders who matter to the White House. I have proposed a 100% tariff on all Teslas. I am calling on all the countries that are affected by this tariff to join us, and our retaliation will target specific Trump constituencies. Another group that we're going to go after is Wisconsin dairy farmers. We know how important they are for the president, and we're not going to let them sell their products in Canada anymore.
And while on her campaign trail, Chrystia Freeland promised to cap profit margins for grocers on essential items. Ms. Freeland's plan to lower food prices represents a key part of the cost of living issue that plagued her for much of her time as finance minister under Justin Trudeau. She also plans to outlaw shrinkflation, the practice of making containers slightly smaller so consumers don't notice they're paying the same for less. Dalhousie University's Dr. Sylvain Charlebois has more on her announcement.
First of all, gross margins are pretty stable. Net margins are incredibly slim in the industry. So to cap anything in the industry would probably force grocers to reconsider stores, the existence of some stores. They may actually decide to just close them, some of them, because some of them actually aren't making money at all. And so if you are to cap anything, you're basically forcing grocers to make really harsh decisions, and that could actually decrease competition and not increase it. Now, in Ms. Freeland's policy, she's also targeting products as well. Same thing. If you're basically capping certain prices, then you're basically discouraging investments. You're discouraging companies from going into that business. And of course, some of the staples she is aiming at is supply management in Canada. Well, supply management is farm gate regulated, and so you would see that pressure coming from upstream, focusing on grocers, and grocers would find it very hard to carry any of these products unless they're committed to carry these products as loss leaders only. Eventually, that's the problem with such a policy, a targeted policy around products in particular, especially when they're supply managed. You can always add some regulations around shrinkflation, and I do admit that it's probably the one thing that annoys a lot of Canadians. They do not like shrinkflation at all, but the reality is that companies do shrinkflate a product due to higher input costs, and often they're sudden input costs. Cocoa, sugar, sodium, wheat. We've seen most food categories being impacted by shrinkflation over the years, and they do that basically to remain competitive. Now, if you are to say make shrinkflation illegal, then you basically are forcing companies to increase prices overall. And so that's one thing. Secondly, I do think there are some positives to shrinkflation. It gets people to buy less food. I would say, if there is one thing we can settle with shrinkflation is this whole issue of taxation at retail. The problem with shrinkflation, which I think is probably the most significant one, is that some products are food products, but because of shrinkflation, they become snacks, and snacks are taxable. So a lot of the times Canadians don't realize that they now buy a product that is taxable at retail, and that adds an extra 5 to 15% on products, and they often don't even realize it. And to me, that's certainly one thing I would deal with, is to stop taxing food at retail because in part of shrinkflation.
A new poll is suggesting that if former central banker Mark Carney wins the Liberal leadership race, he would erase the massive lead the Conservatives have in the polls. The survey suggests that a Carney-led Liberal Party would bring support up 6 points to 37%, putting them in a dead heat with the Tories. The poll says that the Liberals are currently sitting at 31% support. Leger also recorded a 6-point increase in Liberal support since January 26th after U.S. President Donald Trump's call for Canada to become a U.S. state. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was in Brussels today as Canada works to deepen its trade and defense ties with Europe. Trudeau's one-day visit to the Belgian capital included a meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte and the two European Union's most senior leaders.
Every year now for the past number of years, we've had a Canada-EU summit to talk about all the things that we have been doing together and can continue to do together. The friendship, the allyship, the partnership between Canada and the European Union has deepened significantly over the years at a time where the world is more unpredictable and uncertain in so many different aspects. That's why coming together on issues of security, coming together on issue of protecting democracy, of standing up for the rule of law, but also coming together in shared values about creating a better, safer, more prosperous world for not just all of our citizens, but everyone around the world is something that truly drives us forward. On trade, since the signing of CETA many years ago, we've seen the creation of thousands of jobs, of tremendous prosperity on both sides of the Atlantic, and it's something we're very much talking about doing even more of in a reliable and trustworthy way. Beyond that, we're also talking about security issues. Our unequivocal support for Ukraine remains unbelievably important, not just because, yes, we need to stand with our Ukrainian friends and partners as they face this illegal Russian aggression, but because standing up for Ukraine is also standing up for the international rules-based order that protects us all and has led to extraordinary prosperity these past 8 decades. This is a moment for all of us to continue to stand together, and as friends and partners, it's exactly what we will always do.
Canada is working hard to accelerate its defense spending to get to the 2% NATO target it has committed to.
We did talk about reaching our current commitment of 2% and the work that Canada has been doing over the past several months to accelerate our delivery. We also talked about some of the capabilities that Canada is delivering both in North America and particularly in our high Arctic. But also, we talked about the work that we're doing in Latvia as part of a larger coalition. Canada, as I'm sure you're aware, is leading the brigade in Latvia, and I think it's one of the most exceptional examples in all of Europe on how NATO can work really effectively together.
U.S. President Donald Trump has complained that Canada is not meeting its NATO spending commitments. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered his army to beef up troops around the Gaza Strip. An Israeli official says Mr. Netanyahu has also ordered authorities to prepare for every scenario if Hamas doesn't release hostages this Saturday. Hamas has threatened to call off the scheduled hostage release after accusing Israel of violating their fragile deal. It says Israel has delayed allowing displaced Palestinians to return to northern Gaza and failed to facilitate the entry of humanitarian aid. President Donald Trump hosted Jordan's king at the White House yesterday as he escalates pressure on the Arab nation to take in refugees from Gaza as part of his audacious plan to remake the Middle East.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to have King Abdullah with us. He's been a friend of mine for a long time, actually, long before even my first term. And we've had a great relationship. He's a great gentleman, a great leader. We've had some quick discussions just now, and we're going to have some longer discussions after this. And the relationship with Jordan has been very strong, has been with me, and really has been with the country. But I think I've been closer than other presidents to Jordan and what Jordan represents. And it's an honor to have you and your son with us today. And if you'd like to say a few words, and thank you very much.
Mr. President, thank you.
When asked why Jordan should take in Palestinians from Gaza, King Abdullah said that Jordan has been invited to discussions in Riyadh regarding a plan from Egypt and other Arab countries to find a way to, quote, make this work in a way that is good for everybody.
Mr. President, why should the king take in the Palestinian people? He's made clear he doesn't want to.
Well, I don't know, but he may have just something to say because we discussed just briefly. I think maybe you want to say it now, or?
Well, Mr. President, I think we have to keep in mind that there is a plan from Egypt and the Arab countries. We're being invited by Mohammed bin Salman to discussions in Riyadh. I think the point is how do we make this work in a way that is good for everybody? Right. And obviously, we have to look at the best interests of the United States.
All right, stay tuned. Up next, Donald Trump makes a rare appearance with Elon Musk at the Oval Office. And the U.S. border czar gets into it with the Pope. These stories and more right after the break. U.S. President Donald Trump made a rare appearance with Elon Musk in the Oval Office Tuesday. Mr. Trump was signing an executive order to continue downsizing the federal workforce. Mr. Musk said that there are some good people in the federal bureaucracy, but they need to be accountable and called it an unelected fourth branch.
If there's not a good feedback loop from the people to the government, and if you have rule of the bureaucrat, if the bureaucracy is in charge, and then what meaning does democracy actually have? If the people cannot vote and have their will be decided by their elected representatives in the form of the president and the Senate and the House, then we don't live in a democracy, we live in a bureaucracy. So it's incredibly important that we close that feedback loop, we fix that feedback loop, and that the public's elected representatives, the president, the House, and the Senate, decide what happens, as opposed to a large, unelected bureaucracy. This is not to say that there are good people who are in the federal bureaucracy, but you can't have an autonomous federal bureaucracy. You have to have one that is responsive to the people. That's the whole point of a democracy. And if you looked at if you looked at the founders today and said, what do you think of the way things have turned out? Well, we have this unelected, fourth unconstitutional branch of government, which is the bureaucracy, which has, in a lot of ways, currently more power than any elected representative.
Mr. Musk also commented on the financial standing of the country and the importance of fixing the deficit.
And we've also got to address the deficit. So we've got a $2 trillion deficit. And if we don't do something about this deficit, the country's going bankrupt. I mean, it's really astounding that the interest payments alone on the national debt exceed the Defense Department budget, which is shocking because we spend a lot of money on defense. But if that just keeps going, we're essentially going to bankrupt the country. So what I really want to say is, like, it's not optional for us to reduce the federal expenses. It's essential. It's essential for America to remain solvent as a country, and it's essential for America to have the resources necessary to provide things to its citizens and not simply be servicing vast amounts of debt.
The president also asked Mr. Musk to explain some of the examples of fraud and waste that his Doge team have found while combing through the federal government's books.
And also, could you mention some of the things that your team has found, some of the crazy numbers, including the woman that walked away with about $30 million,
right,
etc.?
Well, we do find it sort of rather odd that there are quite a few people in the bureaucracy who have ostensibly a salary of a few $100,000, but somehow manage to accrue tens of millions of dollars in net worth while they are in that position, which is, what happened at USAID. We're just curious as to where it came from. Maybe they're very good at investing, in which case we should take their investment advice, perhaps. But there seems to be mysteriously they get wealthy. We don't know why. Where does it come from? And I think the reality is that they're getting wealthy at the taxpayer expense. That's the honest truth of it.
Despite concerns that he is amassing unaccountable power with little transparency, Mr. Musk described himself as an open book. The U.S. border czar has pushed back against Pope Francis's criticism of the U.S. mass deportation of migrants plan. Tom Homan says that Francis should leave border enforcement to his office and noted that the Vatican is a city-state surrounded by fortress-like walls.
Look at how this works for the Pope. Pope wants to fix the Catholic Church. I'm saying this as a lifelong Catholic. I was baptized Catholic. I was First Communion as a Catholic, Confirmation as a Catholic. He ought to fix the Catholic Church and concentrate on his work and leave border enforcement to us. He wants to attack us for securing our border. He's got a wall around the Vatican, does he not? So he's got a wall around to protect his people and himself, but we can't have a wall around the United States. So I wish he'd stick to the Catholic Church and fix that and leave border enforcement to us.
He was responding after Francis issued criticism to the Trump administration's mass deportation plan. The Vatican's first Latin American pope has long made caring for migrants a priority, demanding that countries welcome, protect, promote, and integrate those fleeing conflicts, poverty, and climate disasters. A history teacher from Pennsylvania who was deemed wrongfully detained by Russia for the past 3.5 years has been released and returned to the U.S. Mark Fogel was flown home by Steve Witkoff, a special envoy for U.S. President Donald Trump, who left Russia with Mr. Fogel and brought him to the White House last night, where Mr. Trump greeted him.
Everybody knows Mark. He's become a very famous guy. He's a very happy guy tonight, so it's just a real honor. An honor to have you at the White House.
I feel like the luckiest man on earth right now. And I want you to know that I am not a hero in this at all. And President Trump is a hero. These men that came from the diplomatic service are heroes. The senators and representatives that passed legislation in my honor to get me home are the heroes. I am in awe of what they all did. My family has been a force. I think my 95-year-old mother is probably the most dynamic 95-year-old on earth right now. And I am so indebted to so many people. I think I remember a Churchill quote that he said when the RAF was fighting the Luftwaffe, and he said that never have so many owed so much to so few. And I put myself, fortunately and unfortunately, into that category, and I said, never has one owed so much to so many. That this superorganism of people that came to my support and the love that I was given sustained me for 3.5 years.
The White House described his negotiated release as a diplomatic thaw that could advance negotiations to end Russia's war in Ukraine. Mr. Trump hinted that another American may be released today. Former Prime Ministers Joe Clark, Kim Campbell, Jean Chrétien, Paul Martin, and Stephen Harper are urging Canadians to fly the maple leaf with pride. Saturday, February 15th marks the 60th anniversary of the Canadian flag. In a joint statement, they say that Canadians have come together to express their love for Canada and their determination to defend its values and independence. They say that they've seen a surge in patriotism in the face of Donald Trump's tariff threats. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation estimates that members of Parliament will take a 3.9% pay raise on April 1st, and they are voicing their concern. The CTF's federal director, Franco Terrazzano, joined us for more on the pay bump.
Yeah, it does. So the raise this April, April 1, will range between an extra $7,900 all the way up to an extra $15,800. Okay, so a backbencher will be getting an extra $7,900, bringing their salary to $211,000. A minister will be getting an $11,600 raise, bringing their salary to just over $311,000. And the prime minister will be taking a $15,800 raise, bringing the prime minister's salary to $422,000. And you know what? Like, this will be their sixth pay raise since the beginning of 2020. Their sixth pay raise while their constituents struggled with pandemics, lockdowns, an inflation crisis, a housing affordability crisis. But so far, none of that has stopped our elected representatives in Ottawa from padding their pockets with bigger taxpayer-funded pay.
One of the justifications for the pay raise has often been that MPs need to be compensated better to attract more talent into federal politics. We asked Mr. Terrazzano for his response.
Well, they've been taking pay raises every single year, and I don't exactly see better performance from these politicians. But not just that, right? It's called the House of Commons for a reason. They're supposed to represent average or common Canadians. But the problem with them living in this bubble of higher pay every year from taxpayers is our politicians, our elected representatives, have become financially divorced from the people they're supposed to represent. And that's one of the reasons that you see some crazy policies coming out of Ottawa, which make life way too expensive for Canadians, because quite frankly, our politicians don't really feel the same pain that average Canadians do. But not only that, right? When politicians give themselves bigger pay, the bureaucracy demands more money from Canadians. So anyone who wants to fix the budget, they're going to need to actually cut the size and cost of the bureaucracy. And for them to do that, they're going to have to say no to more MP pay raises.
Coming up next, we'll have more of today's top national and international headlines. We'll be sitting down with columnist Adam Zivo to discuss the reasons why Canada should consider banning the social media app TikTok, even if the U.S. doesn't end up banning the app. And stranded NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sunny Williams may be returning to Earth sooner than planned. Canada opens up its 2025 Four Nations face-off against Sweden. These stories and more right after the break. Now we're going to take a look at the debate over TikTok and that the Trump administration's move to allow TikTok to temporarily continue to operate. Some have argued that Canada should ban the platform regardless of what the Trump administration does next. Columnist Adam Zivo joined us to unpack the argument.
TikTok is owned by a company named ByteDance, and both of these companies are incorporated in the Cayman Islands, yet both of them operate in China. And that's a problem because under the 2017 National Intelligence Law, any company that is operating in China can be easily compelled by Beijing to grant access to its data, which means that technically under the current legal framework, Beijing can ask TikTok to provide any of the data that it has on hand. Now, TikTok has tried to argue that this data is not actually accessible by Beijing by saying that the data that, for example, exists on American users is stored in the United States. However, researchers have found evidence of backdoors that would still allow, the CCP to access this data if it really wanted to. Now, there are two broad buckets of security concerns around TikTok and its influence in the United States. So the first one is that people believe that TikTok poses a security risk because it gathers so much data around American users, and that can be provided to China and essentially function as a form of espionage. On the other hand, there are concerns that TikTok politicizes its content algorithm and promotes or demotes content based on whether it conforms to Beijing's geostrategic interests. Now, most of the conversation around TikTok situates these two concerns as being equally relevant, but actually it's the latter one, this politicized algorithm, that is far more concerning. And the reason for this is that though TikTok does gather a lot of data about its users, more so than most social media platforms, uh, its practices are still within industry norms, right? And so if China, for example, were to ask, TikTok to provide this data, you could get a lot of information about an average user, but no more so information than an advertiser could get, for example, from Facebook or let's say Twitter. Given the realities of global data markets, and given the fact that you can legally purchase much richer data from these third-party data brokers who benefit from lax regulations in the United States, are TikTok's data gathering practices as significant of a national security concern as some people would want to believe? And I and many others would argue that's not the case. So, in light of that, let's go to these politicized content recommendation algorithms. So the problem here is that TikTok doesn't allow any third party to see the insides of these algorithms. They're a black box. However, there was one firm that was able to estimate what kind of content is prioritized or deprioritized by measuring how many posts are associated with certain hashtags. Because TikTok doesn't publicly disclose the mechanics of its content recommendation algorithms, we can't know for sure whether these algorithms prioritize certain content based on the political goals of Beijing. Uh, we can't say that for certain. However, there was a 2023 study by the Network Cognition Research Institute, which found credible evidence that such politicization is occurring. And they were able to measure this by seeing how many posts were associated with certain hashtags across TikTok and Instagram. So essentially, if you look up a certain hashtag, let's say, for example, Taylor Swift, you'll see a certain number of posts associated with that hashtag, and you can get a certain sense of how many posts are associated with that subject matter more broadly. And for Instagram, it's about what, like 50% to twice as large in terms of its user base than TikTok. So presumably, if you were to look up the same hashtag on TikTok and Instagram, Instagram would have 1.5 to 2 times more posts. And what these researchers found was that for non-politically sensitive hashtags, uh, those hashtags actually conform to their expectations. So the pop culture hashtags that they searched had an Instagram to TikTok ratio of 2.2. So there was on average 2.2 more posts on Instagram than on TikTok. Geostrategically sensitive hashtags had highly unusual ratios. So for example, the ratio for Hong Kong's pro-democracy protests was 181.1. What that means is that Instagram had 181 posts about Hong Kong's pro-democracy protests for every single post on TikTok. For Tiananmen Square, that ratio was 81.5. For Tibet, it was 37.7. And for Taiwan, it was 15.3. Now, these incredible ratios simply wouldn't be possible if there wasn't some manipulation going on in the algorithm. And this is why these researchers concluded that it was very likely that TikTok is promoting or demoting content based on Beijing's geostrategic interests. Now, this manipulation wasn't just contained to issues directly pertaining to China. These researchers also looked at a small number of hashtags pertaining to other geopolitical conflicts, and they found really strange ratios for Ukraine and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, for Iran's pro-democracy protests, and for the Kashmir independence movement. And so this suggests that TikTok heavily biased its algorithms in favor of Russia, Hamas, and the Iranian government, while undermining India, China's regional rival, by supporting the Kashmir independence movement, which was basically non-existent on Instagram. So from all of this, we can conclude that it is very likely that TikTok is a tool of information warfare that is being utilized by China to warp minds around the world so that they conform, not totally, but somewhat more conform to China's worldview. Now, unfortunately, other third-party researchers weren't able to replicate these results because days after the study was published, TikTok disabled the ability to search hashtags by post volume, at least in politically sensitive cases, citing misuse of this function. And I think that also speaks volumes. So if we can accept that TikTok is a weapon of information warfare, then why should any Western government allow it to be used within its territory? I mean, we don't allow our foreign adversaries to operate large state propaganda newspapers or, state propaganda TV channels within our borders. Why should we use a different standard with a social media platform which is obviously being misused?
NASA's two stuck astronauts may end up back on Earth a little sooner than planned. The space agency announced on Tuesday that SpaceX will switch capsules for upcoming astronaut flights in order to bring Butch Wilmore and Sunny Williams home in mid-March. It will shave a couple weeks off their prolonged stay at the International Space Station, which hit the 8-month mark last week. The test pilots should have returned in June on Boeing's Starliner capsule after what should have been a week-long flight demo. The 50th anniversary celebration of Saturday Night Live is so big it's not even on Saturday. It will air on Sunday and run for 3 hours and will welcome back alumni stars like Tina Fey, Eddie Murphy, Dave Chappelle, and Steve Martin. Some of the musical guests will include Paul McCartney, Sabrina Carpenter, Bad Bunny, and Miley Cyrus. NBC will air SNL 50, the anniversary celebration, on Sunday starting at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Almost 9 years after the Best on Best tournament, the 2016 World Cup of Hockey, tonight Canada opens up the 2025 Four Nations face-off against Sweden at the Bell Centre in Montreal. Canada is the defending champion from the event and has won 6 of these 8 events since the original Canada Cup. The United States was the last non-Canadian team to win, taking the 1996 World Cup in a best-of-3 series against its northern neighbors. A giant schnauzer named Monty has won the top prize at this year's Westminster Kennel Club Dog Show. Monty bested 6 other finalists to take Best in Show last night at New York's Madison Square Garden.
I've always loved all the history and tradition that is Westminster, and I'm sure everyone here tonight is as happy as I am for Westminster to be back in Manhattan. At the iconic Madison Square Garden for Best in Show at the 149th Annual Westminster Kennel Club Dog Show, I choose the giant schnauzer.
Oh, Monty! He did it! 3 years and he finally wins Best in Show. What an incredible moment for Katie Bernadette.
Monty the Magnificent, your 2025 Best in Show, the Giant Schnauzer.
Congratulations, Sandra Nordstrom, Katie Bernadette, and Cheryl Ann Ambrose. What a great win for all of you tonight. Incredible.
The award is considered the most prestigious prize in the American dog show world, where each dog is judged according to how closely it matches the ideal for its breed. The runner-up for the 3rd time was a Whippet named Bourbon. I'm Teresa Skubik, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. For more news on demand, you can always visit our website at forumdailynews.ca and make sure to follow us on social media. You can also watch all of our commentary programming on the Newsforum YouTube channel. Good night, Canada.